and foremost, thanks everyone so much for joining us in person and online. Should not be on there. Is everyone fine? Right, we're doing social distancing. Everyone's comfortable. We got the barriers up. Just a quick reminder: if you do want to come for next month, just make sure you register as early as possible because we are quite limited on space. We want to make sure everyone's safe and comfortable.
And one of the things that we can do if we have enough advance notice is we can actually have 2 times. So we can do an earlier time, say at 6 and then at 7:30, so that we have less people, but we're still able to accommodate. So when we send out the email, just a reminder to make sure and let us know that you're coming so that we can plan accordingly for...
Does that mean we get to drink twice as much wine?
You and I?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please, everybody come to you. Yes. So we got a couple of new faces in the group this month as well. So thank you guys for joining up and hope you have a good time. You'll find everybody here is pretty chill. It's a fun little group. So tonight we're going to be drinking some wine from Germany, specifically Riesling from Germany.
Can we talk about how excited, excited we are?
I was going to talk about mine and Leah's just love affair that we have struck up again with Riesling in the last 3 months, I would say.
Yeah.
Where it's pretty much all we want to drink.
Yeah.
So don't be surprised if we do 3 months of Riesling this year. Because we're super back into it. I think we both kind of went through our Riesling phase in our early 20s, which is a very typical thing. If you get into wine a little bit earlier, Riesling is one of the most, if not the most incredible grape variety in the world. Because it can be bone dry and it can be maple syrup and everything in between. And it's kind of, I think, a grape that has gotten a bad rap in the last couple of decades, just because we don't really get great Riesling exported out of
and I think
Canada, really.
I think the Riesling that you get access to is mass-produced Landwein, super sweet.
Dr. Lucen.
But even more so Black Tower and stuff like that, right? So and I think when it for me personally, when it comes to Riesling, when I fell in love with Riesling, I was working in the restaurant industry, and you would go to restaurants and they would have these reserved lists of hundreds of labels of Riesling, different vintages, different sweetness levels, but they all paired so perfectly with the food. And so that's another really great thing about Riesling that you kind of forget about is it's such a great food wine, but it just so easily gets forgotten about. So that's where we've been exposed to some really cool Rieslings over the past couple of months, and it's oh yeah, this is why we love it. This is why it's so cool.
It's almost like rediscovering a band that you listen to in high school or a genre of music.
Like the Backstreet Boys.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Or
maybe that was just me.
It's I forgot about that album, and it's all you want to listen to for the next year. That's kind of what happens with Riesling. So hopefully, if you guys already haven't had your love affair with Riesling, maybe we can start it here tonight, and then in 10 years, be like, remember we did Riesling? Let's do that again. Yeah. So starting off basically with the country of Germany, which is probably the most associated with the Riesling grape. Germany is an old world wine. It's been making wine for as long as France and Spain, and before they were even called France and Spain.
And even longer, I think, when you really look at some of the first plantings of vine. So there is there's a version of vine called Vitis vinifera that is what all wine producing grapes come from. But back in Germany, there's even a lineage past that there was Vitis vinifera, and I can't remember the other term, so it was only a subtle variation of the typical vine that had been growing in Germany before anybody, the first century sort of thing. So it has a huge history.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about 2 regions in Germany today. We're drinking 2 Rieslings coming from 2 different regions, and they're pretty different Rieslings, just from tasting them this afternoon and maybe earlier this week. We tasted them as well last week. They're going to be a pretty good, I would say, a pretty good representation of what both regions kind of go for, but also very different in style from one another. And we'll get into that in a bit. But the first one we're going to do is going to be the Müller Catoir, which we have in your glass right here. So this is going to come from the region of Hart. Now, let's apologize in advance. for butchering the German language.
My German's impeccable.
Okay, perfect. I apologize in advance for butchering the German language. So Hart is going to be, it's actually a small village. It's Haaardt, which is kind of more in the southwest part of Germany. And the Hart village is named after the Hart Mountains, right? So does anybody know the region of Alsace in France? Anybody ever heard of Alsace, right? So Alsace is completely northeast of France. It's on the border with Germany. And you have the Vosges mountain range, which actually leads into the Hart mountain range. So you're going to see those similar styles of Alsatian wine and German wines are going to be very, very similar from the Pfalz region, which is what Hart falls into, and Alsace, or Alsace, which is not a real thing. It's an inside joke.
Like brioche?
Like brioche. Alsace, but Bianco. Pfalz is, it's the southwestern part of Germany. It is kind of it's like the wine, what do you call that? Like the wine trail, I guess. They have like a bunch of, hundreds of wineries that you kind of walk up, or drive up, I guess, through the countryside and kind of stop in and check out a bunch of different wineries. It's also a wine region where you're going to get a lot of cooperatives. So there's actually 18 cooperatives in the region of Pfalz. So cooperative being a bunch of different grape growers or producers will bring their grapes to a cooperative, and they can either make the wine for you and bottle it, label it. Like they can do as much or as little as you would like to see in that. That's all I got for Pfalz.
Oh, okay. Good. I think so. If I can just then elaborate, like on the German, like the location and the terroir, if we think about it. So most of the wine producing estates and/or regions in Germany are going to fall along the Rhine River, and the Rhine River sort of has two forks in it. So it does run north to south, and the very first fork will sort of head west. And that's where the region of Mosel is. So if you've ever heard of Mosel, that's one of the bigger regions there. And so that sort of sits west. And then there's another fork that comes. So, if Mosel and the Rhine River goes off here, there's another fork here that sort of splits. And right around where that fork happens, there's three different regions. And we're going to learn about the Rheingau when we taste the next wine. But then if you follow the river down, that's where Pfalz sits. And that's where Josh was talking about Alsace right to the south. So Alsace in the south, and then Pfalz up with the mountain ranges there. And so the wine that we're tasting tonight comes from Pfalz, so it's more southern to the Rhine. But it's an estate that's been around since 1744, so it's 9th generation production, and it's all family owned and operated, so it's been handed down generation by generation by generation. And what you find with wineries like that is because it's generation, it typically has a pretty traditional style when it comes to winemaking, because I'm making wine how my dad did and how his dad did and how his dad did, sort of thing. But the great thing about this specific estate is that it's been really practicing organic and biodynamic viticulture since the beginning. So they are certified organic, and they really focus on the terroir. There's about 4 different soil types that exist in their different sub-regions. And so they, depending on which site they're operating out of, will depend on the type of soil that they're going to be using. This producer in particular focuses 70% on making Riesling, and then the other 70%, not Riesling, 70% is when their vines are on the hillside, and then 30% are on the land. So when they're on the hillsides, they tend to get a little bit better sun exposure, but because they're higher altitude, they'll be cooler, so they'll maintain that acidity, rather than on the valley floor where it'll be a little bit hotter. One of the things about both wines that we're tasting tonight, so this is a little bit about German wine classification. So there is an entry-level sort of land vine, which would mean table wine, and they also call it, what else do they call table wine?
Qualitas 9.
No. No. I think it's Tabla vine and land vine, and those are like the table wines that you get from Germany. And then the next classification up from that is Qualitats vine. And there's 13 sub-regions all around Germany that practice Qualitats vine. And then the next classification up of higher quality is Prädikat. And so if you've ever heard of the terms Cabernet, Spätlese, Auslese, Beerenauslese, Trockenbeerenauslese, that's sort of the categories of sweetness. And you only get that when you head into that Praticat quality. So both wines that we're tasting tonight are Qualitats wine, which means that the label is going to tell us if it's sweet or dry. And this one on the label says Trocken. Trocken directly translates in German to mean dry. So if you're ever picking up a German Riesling from the store and it says Trocken on it, it automatically will tell you that it's going to be a dry Riesling, regardless of if it's a Qualitats wine or a Praticat wine. Okay? So this one is Trocken. The other cool thing about this producer in particular is they have a bunch of sub-sites all around the Pfalz region. And this one in particular comes from Burgergarten, which is the premier region of that area. So tonight we're tasting the higher quality wine, I would say, first. And it definitely has some ageability to it, but it's also incredibly subtle when it comes to all of its aromas, its palate. Like, it's very, very subtle. So you'll notice when we taste the second wine that if we were to have tasted the second wine first, this one might feel a little dull, but it's really, really lovely and beautiful and delicate. So Josh, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about
to touch on your point, like, when we got these wines in, I know this producer, I've had their wine before. I was super jacked to share this with Bryce and Leah, and I didn't know much about the producer we're going to do second. And when we tried this, I was like, oh, like, it's kind of like, it is a little bit light, but it's almost like you can sense all of those really interesting characteristics that are just under the surface. So I personally would highly recommend aging this wine if you can. If you've ever had an aged Riesling before, Mr. Almost laughing at me. He told me he doesn't make wine.
No.
If you've had an old Riesling before, it again can be one of the most interesting wines you'll try, because we're talking about notes of like gasoline, petroleum.
It's like candied ginger,
flint. If the color gets really dark, the texture gets thicker. Yeah. I think that this wine would benefit from aging even a couple years, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Because I've had wines from them before that were like ready to drink, which I don't think this one is, that were very, very, very impressive. I think this one, if we hold on to it for a bit, will end up being in that category, because they're one of the premier producers, not in Pfalz, in Germany.
In Germany. And that comes from the history. Like, they're one of the first estates that ever started.
Yeah. And just the fact that they're making Riesling, and it's from Burgengarten, which Leah said is like one of the premier villages of Pfalz. Like, there's no reason why this won't age to be a spectacular wine.
So, and typically when you think about aging wine, you don't often think about aging white wine unless there's some specific characteristics of it. And two of the major characteristics that tend to exist in Riesling, no matter what, is high residual sugar and high acidity. So if you ever taste a Riesling and you're like, I feel like it tastes sweet, but then it sort of just goes away, that's because it has that acidity to balance it. In this case, this is a dry Riesling, but it still does have that acidity. So when we say age it, we're not saying this is aged like 15, 20 years. This is like 2 to 5 years max, but you'll tend to get a little bit more aromatics from it if you give it that space and time. So.
And that's one of the reasons too that, one of the reasons that the reasons that
that was a great phrase.
I know, that was a Freudian slip, yeah. Riesling does have a huge aging potential, and it's just such an incredible grape because it does have a super high level of sugars and sweetness, but it's matched with a crazy high acidity, right? So if you don't have those together, then Riesling's terrible. It's super sweet or it's crazy acidic.
Yeah.
But because it has both of those in such harmony, it's just an incredible grape variety. And when you do it right, it's just magic. Like, yeah, that's all I want to drink.
I forgot to mention some cool facts about this because I was just looking at my notes and I got all excited about like the region of Germany. These vines are 40-year-old vines, so they're incredibly old. They're all hand harvested because these vines are on the hillside, like we talked about. So they're that 70% that's on the hillside. And the other thing, just going back to the history and tradition, they talk about harvesting at the rhythm of the season and making wine at the rhythm of the season. So that just sort of speaks to like the tradition that exists in the family. I thought that was, I hadn't heard that before. Like you hear about biodynamics in terms of, oh, the moon has to be at this height, or, this has to be going on with the weather. No, this is about the rhythm of the season. So I just thought that was really cool too. Yeah.
Questions or comments about this wine or about Riesling or Germany? No? Yes.
So you're saying that this area is closer to the border with France? Does France have a Riesling equivalent?
So France will, they do produce Riesling, but only in Alsace.
Only in Alsace.
So Alsace is an interesting region. Alsace has gone back and forth between France and Germany so many times that they were like, fuck you guys, we're going to do our own language, make our own culture.
Yeah.
So they speak Alsatian, they have their own food, and you let us know what country we're part of, right? But the wines for sure are inherently more of a German style. It's got that cold, it's a very similar climate to what we have here at Falls, right? So it's cold weather grapes. So we're talking Pinot Blanc, Pinot Auxerrois, Riesling, Pinot Noir. So in the region of Alsace, you can get arguably the best German Rieslings, I think, are probably going to be the top. But the best Alsatian Rieslings, like these Grand Cru, they have Grand Cru Alsatian Rieslings, they're pretty close, right? And they're very, very similar in style. The Alsatian ones, for me, tend to be a little bit drier and maybe higher in the exotic fruit.
Yeah, I would say Alsatian wines definitely have their own distinct characteristics. So you can definitely tell an Alsatian Riesling from a German Riesling, but you'll still get all those beautiful aromatics. Alsatian wines tend to have a little bit more body to them. So, and that could be from how they vinify them to how long they let the grapes ripen because it is cooler climate. But Alsace will be the only region in France that you would see Riesling from.
Yeah. But we are seeing, so we see Rieslings of quality being made in Australia.
Yes.
Where else?
Oregon, Washington.
Washington.
Yeah.
There's some in
Ontario,
Niagara. But I would say by far, in my opinion, we're talking Germany, we're talking Alsace. There's some Henschke in Australia is pretty legendary. His Rieslings are pretty outstanding.
Yeah.
But you're gonna pay.
And there's also some cool Rieslings if you want to sort of just experiment and explore, coming from New Zealand, from the North Island. So that's also a cool place to look for them. Yeah.
Other questions? You guys have noticed that Leah and I both overpoured, so everyone essentially got a full glass of wine. Normally everyone's
done.
We're like, we have to take 10 minutes
Riesling for everyone.
It's we didn't have any for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not a question, but I found that seems like Rieslings outside of Germany don't always do a good job of labeling where it's sweet or dry, and it's
Totally.
Absolutely, yeah. So we were talking about before, Germany in terms of everything, right? But especially wine is very German. So German wine labels are when you pick up a wine label, they're very hard to read, right? But if you know how to do it, you can go I'll probably know what this wine will taste like, right? It's everything is, there's no exceptions to the rule. So I always say France is the cooking of the wine world, right? It's or the Italian, throw a little bit of salt and you vaguely follow a recipe. Germany is the baking. If you put in a tablespoon too much, you fucked everything, right? It's so organized and it's all done by brick level, sweetness level, right? And it's there's no exceptions to the rule. This is it, and that's it. So to your point, you pick up a Riesling from Canada, and you're could be sweet. We had the TH Riesling a couple years ago that went through mallow fermentation, so it tasted like a Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Right. So it is. If you kind of roll the dice, I would say if you're getting a Riesling that is from an unknown area or an unknown region in the world,
I think that's a great point too, because it'll depend on the site, it'll depend on the climate, and it'll depend on the winemaker preference outside of Germany. But to Josh's point, you pick this up and it says Trocken, it's dry. Riesling, Trocken, dry. Boom, done. The other thing to think about, so I was mentioning sort of the different classifications, and when you get into Praticat, they have the 6 levels of classification, and typically they are progressively sweeter. So a Cabernet will be less sweet than a Spätlese, than an Auslese, etc. But those aren't technically sweetness levels, so they have guideposts in between that. So you could pick up a Spätlese that is drier than a Cabernet, for example, just because of how the winemaker, when they decided to pick it and how they applied it. But if you're buying the difference between a Cabernet and an Auslese, the Auslese will 9 times out of 10 be way sweeter than the Cabernet.
But then they also have like sometimes they'll say like spot lazy trocken. So
Yeah.
you know that it's like a spot lazy, but it's a dry spot lazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, there's not really a lot of surprises.
And maybe
for
that's
German
one of
wine.
the cool resources that we could actually provide to the group is like how to read a German wine label, because once you get it, it's
Yeah, and if you guys figure it out, you let me know.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, they pretty easy.
I know. I'm getting pretty good at the German wines. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the last couple months, yeah, I've been really into German wine. So.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
What do you guys think of the wine?
Good.
Good?
Yeah, it's nice, right? It'll be fun if you drink it on its own, and it's fun to pair with food. And it's got a little bit like, I love the viscosity of Rieslings too, right? Like this is like it's got like almost like a little bit of an oily texture to it. It's not like really crisp and light. It's like, it's like a little bit olive oily on the tongue. All right,
Okay.
drink up and we'll come pour the other one. Oh yes, Mr. Owens.
All the Riesling I've had was always sweet.
Mm-hmm.
This was such an amazement. What is the relation between the sweet and the dry?
It depends on so I was talking about the classifications. It depends on, so with a Qualitas wine, a lot of times what they'll do is chaptalize it, which means they're adding sugar to it, and that residual sugar will kill the yeast, and that's why it's low alcohol, high sugar. So if you're getting a Praticat vine with those levels of sweetness, it's actually when they're harvesting the grapes. So the earlier they harvest the grapes, the less sweetness in the grape, and the later they harvest, the more sweetness, and therefore the sweeter the wine. So it depends on which quality level you're getting will indicate that.
And I think like the reason why people associate Germany with sweet wine is because of those like mass-produced wines.
Yeah.
They're not good. They don't taste good
Because
so
they're chaptalized so much.
Yeah, they dump sugar into it to mask the fact that it's not a good tasting wine. So when we think about German Riesling that's $10, we're like, oh, it's always sweet. Well, because they dump a bunch of sugar in because it tastes like shit.
Yeah.
Right? So when you have like these higher end Rieslings, that it's just a natural, again, that balance of sweetness and acidity, it's a whole different ballgame.
It really, you get to know what the Riesling grape is all about, and it's super exciting, and that's maybe the sad part and why Riesling was so exciting, is because when you taste good Riesling, you're like, oh, I actually really like Riesling. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you taste crap Riesling, you're like, this stuff is awful, I never want to drink that, and that's sort of the mindset that you have. So getting exposed to different types, and the price points on these are really, really reasonable.
Yeah, this is a little bit more expensive. You're probably going to pay about, in Alberta, probably about $55 a bottle for it, roughly. Yeah. Maybe 60.
The other one, though.
This one here?
Yeah.
At a store, you're probably going to pay about $35.
Yeah, see?
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is drinking nice right now, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. Any questions from the guys on the phone? No?
Congratulations on your new job, Beth.
I wish you would have told me. I might have been recruiting. People on the phone? Thank you. People, what am I supposed to say? People on the computer?
They're on the line.
On the line?
On the line. Any other questions about the Rue de Catoir or False for right now? Beautiful. We'll come around and pour the magic mushrooms.
Maybe more reasonably.
JK, magic mushrooms. Okay, guys. Everyone has the new wine. Beautiful. Okay, so we're going to head over to another region of Germany called Rheingau. Am I saying that correctly, Leah?
I don't know.
Rheingau.
You don't pronounce the G?
Rheingau?
I think it's Rheingau.
Rheingau.
Yeah.
I don't know. Rheingau. So the Rheingau region is arguably and easily the most prestigious and most well-known wine region in Germany. So the reason why the Rheingau does so well is because it's very, very well structured, and the education has been passed down by, believe it or not, the church, right? So the monastery, where they had a lot of money, a lot of people working for them for minimum wage, and so they were able to develop really great ways to make wine, and they were one of the first ones to kind of put in some rules and some quality control for wine. And then when it went into secularization, A lot of the relationship between the church and state kind of were lost. In the Rheinhau, they were able to keep it together. So all of that knowledge kind of passed from the church to the private sector, I guess you could call it. So they have a very, very strong lineage and a very long lineage of how to make wine, and really, really, really high standards for gold. They actually have one of the most prestigious viticultural institutes in the world in the Rheinhau. I think it's like the top 3, and it's, you know, at a 200-300 years old. Well, the Rheinhau cool is so it's a lot of it's on steep slopes. I believe the wine that we're going to be drinking, I don't know.
No, so the vineyard site has like crazy elevation.
Yeah.
This one in particular doesn't come from that high elevation. Yeah.
So there's a lot of high elevation and steep slopes in the Rheinhau, which is great because we are seeing some more prestigious wine regions be affected by climate change, but because they're so high up, it doesn't affect them because it's a cooler temperature anyways, which is kind of a cool thing for them. The Rheinhau, this is something that kind of blew my mind and blew your mind today. From the mid-19th century, the late 19th century to the mid-20th century was the premier wine region in the world. So it was like the most expensive wine you could buy. It was more expensive than buying first growth Bordeaux.
Which blows my mind.
And then I was like, I wonder what happened in the mid-20th century. And then I was like, oh, people got mad because of World War II, and they stopped being willing to pay for these high German prices. But really, really mind-blowing that if you think even just back to the mid-40s, 1940s, like people were paying top dollar for Riesling from the Rheinhau, like more so than Bordeaux, which, I mean, by today's standard is crazy. They have kind of crept back. Again, it's that quality, right? So whether or not it's a bad reputation, we all know why people didn't buy wine in the 50s and 60s. You cannot deny the quality of wine that comes out of this region, and they just keep making it the same way. And the tradition of Rheinhau. Rheinhau makes wine very, very particular to that region, and they stick to the original grape varieties. So some of the other regions fall to be, for example, Rheinhessen. Rheinhessen. Yeah. Are experimenting with, Müller, Thurgau. I can't think of any other grape varieties. Maybe some Pinot Blanc, but like different grape varieties, like more modern grape varieties to kind of blend in and try to make quality in these regions. Whereas in Rheinhau, we're talking about 79% of the plantings are Riesling. So just under 80% of all the vines, like they only make Riesling, and then 12% is Pinot Noir. Right, so they make Riesling, and they make Pinot Noir, and then, my math is terrible, but 8% is just kind of random stuff.
Bonus marks. Who knows what Pinot Noir in Germany is called?
I do.
You don't count. Anybody?
I'd be really impressed. Bryce?
No, I don't know.
Spätburgunder. So if you ever see Spätburgunder on a label of a German wine, it means Pinot Noir.
Yeah. And what's really cool about, just like a sidebar to get into Spätburgunder, Pinot Noir in Germany as well as Alsace, I love it.
It's so good.
So good.
Yeah.
Alsatian Pinot Noirs typically are like really, really high acidic, light, fresh, which I love. What's cool about German Spätburgunder or German Pinot Noir is that it's not even based, like, the style of Pinot Noir is not based on region or even really soil type. It's strongly based on per house, like how each individual house wants to make it. So what's the one we had that was incredible?
The breath?
The Bretz.
Yeah.
It was a Pinot Noir. It was big and meaty and full, and we were blown away because we were expecting this kind of light, crisp one.
Yeah.
And then you drink a Pinot Noir from the house next door, and it's basically Beaujolais.
Yeah.
So there isn't really you can't go, oh, this is a Pinot Noir from, Rheinhau. It's going to taste like this.
No.
It really is kind of dependent on each individual house, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
A little sidebar on Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
That's all I have for Rheinhau.
Oh, okay. So this producer in particular, I feel like has a little bit of heart and soul built into it. So this was one of the houses that was impacted during World War II. The site was actually completely destroyed via bombing, so they lost everything as it relates to the site, but it was family owned and operated. So the dad, what he did, his name was Antoine. He took ownership from his father, and he started to try and rebuild it, but he passed away really early. So he had a son who's now the winemaker, Johannes. And Johannes was born in 1964, and his dad passed away in 1966. So he didn't know his father at all. And this is a small family, small production. They started with only 2.9 hectares. And it was actually the mom that she ran a flower shop, she raised the family, and she operated the winery, and like raised the children to figure out, or to just live. So when her son, Johannes, turned 19, he took over the winery, and he started producing wine. So when he was 18, 19, he went to the college that Josh was talking about. He got his master's degree in viticulture, and then he produced his first vintage in 1986 when he was, I think 19 or 20 years old, which is incredible. Since then, he's grown production from 2.9 hectares to 40 hectares. And he's really, really involved both in bringing, so the sub-region, I'm going to forget it here. Rudenheim is the sub-region that he's operating in within the Rheingau, and he works with the Ministry of Environment to really focus on how they can help enhance the terroir, but also maintain tradition when it comes to some of the practices that they have there, making really fresh, vibrant Riesling. The sites that they have vary in elevation from about 105 meters to 275 meters. I always have a hard time translating what that looks like. But the cool thing about this site is that they talk about, or Johannes talks about the degree, not only the elevation, but also the degree of how steep some of these slopes are. And so some of the steepest slopes are actually 62 degrees. So if we think about 90 degrees, 62 degrees. So obviously no machines there, all hand harvesting. This vineyard site has lower elevation, and so it's sitting at only about a 6% incline. So they do use some machines to help support harvesting in this case, but still practice as much as possible on, no pesticides, organic production, but still using some machine support just because it is so small. But yeah, 62 degrees. And if you go out
when you show up, you're like, I'm here for harvest. They're like, yeah. And I'm like, I'll see you later.
Yeah.
And then go check out your
you
neighbor.
need hiking boots.
Yeah.
But so if you visit their website, the cool thing was they had this tractor and they showed you the elevation. And so 62 degrees, the tractor was sitting like this. Like nobody's driving that tractor on those slopes to try and do anything. So it's all walking. So Johannes himself, as I was talking about, is really, really passionate about bringing sort of the signature of the Ruetime region, which is from Pfalz, it's forward. And so when you taste this wine, and one of the reasons we wanted to taste this second is if you think about the Müller Couture, it's really subtle, it's elegant, it's pretty, whereas this wine is so much more expressive, it's vibrant, it's piercing, it's really, really fresh, super linear. So they're two very different Rieslings that you're going to experience, but both are on the drier side. So it's also a fun contrast to sort of see, dry Rieslings in comparison from some of those sub-regions. So,
and I would say even to touch on your point, Leah, where he's kind of more of a modern, I guess I would call him like a modern winemaker, but he is making very technically great wines.
Yeah.
Right? They're hitting all the points.
Yeah.
And even, I don't know, pass me a bottle there, Bryce.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at the, Germany is very much those regions in France where it's tradition is very important, right? So this is a very typical, more kind of classic. Even this is a little bit whoa, what are they doing with the label, right? Whereas this is quite modern. Mm-hmm. for a German, the packaging. Yeah. It's called Magic Mountain. It's very kind of angular. It's very kind of like a modern design.
Yeah.
And that really kind of also ties into the style of wine, I believe, where it's everything's very crisp on the label, and in the wine as well. Everything's on point. Yeah. I don't know about I wouldn't suggest aging this wine. I think it's ready to drink right now. I think it's great. Just a fun contrast to the Müller Couture, which again I would hold on to for a couple years to see what it does.
Yeah. And this Riesling as well says Trocken on the back, so automatically you would pick it up and you'd say Riesling Trocken, okay, it's going to be a dry Riesling, and it is. You definitely get the fruit characters much more than you do from the Couture, but you still get that nice crisp acidity. It's super clean. I love this one. This is probably my favorite. I appreciate the subtlety there, but I like this because it's just so sharp and hits you in the face. But I like that acidity.
We have a couple of hilarious puns from Bruce and Paula. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming it's Bruce. It says, I had a false impression of Riesling.
That's a good one.
One clap to
Let's
Bruce.
clap for Bruce there.
And then he wrote, oh, it was the least I could do. So, bravo, Bruce. Bravo.
Look, Beth and Alex are clapping. You can do clapping emoji.
What do you guys think of this wine compared to the other one? Like, who likes this wine versus the first one more?
This stays.
Yeah.
It's a longer finish, yeah.
Yeah, it's a longer finish and everything. It'd be really interesting to like try them side by side again with the yeah. Who liked the first wine better?
I think the first one was better.
Yeah, I think like I'm saying like right now I think this tastes better, but I'm thinking like this will be
So the potential.
the potential in the first one I think is incredible. And I'm a little biased because I've had their wine before and I just like their wine.
That's a good. You can talk about the closures because the style of wine are different, right?
Also, yeah.
So Bryce, Josh, and I have this ongoing argument about wine closures because there's the Stelvin closure, which is the screw cap, and then you have the cork closure, which is obviously cork, and you can also do it with synthetic cork. And Josh and I feel very strongly about the cork enclosure because of the romantic nature of opening a bottle of wine. It's kind of like a ballet. It's super cool. So opening a bottle with a cork is very different than walking over and being like, "Sir, the lights." Like that has a very different feel. Yet at the same time, the Stelvin closure is actually better for aging, better for protection. And
we don't know if it's better for aging. We're not sure yet.
But based on the styles, right? Like
depends on the wine. Depends on the wine.
And based on the styles, a Stelvin will keep this wine fresher longer versus cork. So, it's interesting. There's some producers. So there's a producer in Burgundy, Jean-Marc Rocard, one of the top producers in Burgundy, and they actually started putting Stelvin on their higher end labels, because a lot of people think screw caps are cheap wine. And that's actually not true at all. So they started putting Stelvins on their higher end wine first, and then corks on their lower end wines, and making their way through. But yeah.
Questions? Comments? Yes.
I heard about the corks. I heard that in New Zealand they started with screw tops because everybody that buys wine drinks a bottle of wine within 4 days.
I know a couple of Kiwis, and I would say that sounds like the truth. But maybe
well, it is like if you aren't aging the wine, then absolutely go with the Stelvin. And this is the debate that we've kind of been having. If you're aging a wine like this, where it's white and crispy and crunchy, you don't really want it to get any oxygen, right? You don't really want this to change. You want it to keep it as fresh as possible. So that might be more beneficial to have a Stelvin than, for instance, this wine, which I think would benefit from getting a little touch of oxygen through the cork and getting some of those more secondary and tertiary flavors for Riesling, because you don't want this to be fresh if you're aging it. You want to get that petroleum, that minerality, that like what's the other, like it's like old, like bruised stone fruit, like old apricots and stewed fruit, right? So in my opinion, I would rather age this with a cork.
It also depends on how long you're going to lay it down for, because if you actually are going to age a wine for 5-10 years in Stelvin, it might take even longer. So if the recommended ageability of wine is 5 years, it's under Stelvin it might be 8 to 10. So it also keeps it fresher. It just takes longer to age rather than a cork, which, to Josh's point, brings that oxygen in a little bit more.
What about the whole thing about getting corked wine? You're not going to get a corked wine with the screw top, right?
No. You're not. No, there could be other faults there, but if you're drinking screw cap wine in a restaurant and you think it tastes off, it's not cork taint. It could be faulty, but it's not ever going to be cork.
It wouldn't be TCA. Tetra. I think it's actually a German wine region.
It's not. No. It's chemistry.
It's chemistry, But you're correct. You won't get that. But there are other faults that can happen.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Elmas had another question. Yes.
You were talking about Johan, and that he was working together with the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah.
Two, among other things, change the terroir. How do you change terroir? I thought terroir was what you've got.
What a great question.
So, and maybe I misspoke, not to change the terroir, but to reinforce the importance of terroir. So to bring forward the history that they talked about, so that people in Rheingau aren't, trying to plant some of those indigenous or non-indigenous varieties and trying to be all creative. He's really focused on the tradition and the history of the region. And yes, he can be innovative within that, but because the region is so well known for Riesling, let's not change that. And so let's research and find out why Riesling grows so well there and reinforce that with some of the producers in the region. So, sorry if
I have a question to touch on Mr. Elmer's question.
You're asking me?
Yes. Can you change terroir? Because terroir isn't, terroir in French means the soil. But when we're talking about terroir in terms of wine, it's the soil, it's the winemaker's hand, it's the atmospheric pressure, it's the weather, it's the slope, it's everything, right?
So
the weather.
Can you change terroir?
Can a region change its terroir?
Can terroir change?
Can
Yes.
terroir change? I agree.
But there's no influence that people could have in the short term.
Exactly.
Like longer term, yeah, it's climate change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, people can impact terroir, but short term, as a winemaker, I can't say like, oh, I'm going to change this unless I'm planting grapes on this slope in this soil, and I decide, you know what, I don't have any vines over here, and I'm going to try over here because it's different soil, different elevation, different slope, different sun exposure, etc. Then yes, I can technically change the terroir in a sense. It's not going to change the climate, but it could change some of those other elements. So that would be the only.
What about this? Here's a question for you.
Oh no.
So everyone, now all of a sudden, everybody in Chablis is like, we're going to harvest a month later.
Yeah.
That would drastically change how Chablis across the world tastes.
But that's not terroir.
But wouldn't that tie into terroir?
No.
No. Okay.
That's not terroir.
We're getting down the rabbit hole here.
Yeah. That's not terroir.
It's
a good question. Yeah, it's a great question.
And since Bruce said online here, the Leitz was nice and fruity. The Mueller Patois was more savory and complex, which I 100% agree with.
Yeah.
More questions? Comments? What about someone online? What about Matt? Matt, throw us a hard one.
No, don't.
We have the book right here, don't worry. And we can just turn off the screen.
Well, Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I bet he's not even there. He just probably signed in and passed out.
Yeah, recorded it for later.
Oh, he's there. There he is. So those of you who don't know, we expanded our tasting group to Saskatoon, and Matt Lapointe, who is a server from Primal, in a restaurant in Saskatoon, is running our tasting group out there. So, if you go to Saskatoon, go eat at Primal because it's easily the best restaurant in town. And B, Matt's a cool guy and knows a ton about wine, and he's joining us tonight. Thumbs up from Bruce. No question from Matt. Thumbs up from Matt too. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Okay.
So I guess I have a closing question.
Yes.
Did anybody come in tonight being like, oh, I can't believe we're drinking Riesling, and leave feeling like, oh, I'm so excited I got to taste Riesling? Yeah.
Yeah.
You people?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
The Riesling I've had was sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like we said, there are Rieslings there are also very high-end Rieslings that are sweet.
But that
they have that acidity. I think that's the problem with those low-end ones. They don't have the acidity to compete when you use chaptalization, when you add sugar. So it's just a flabby, sweet wine. There is a Riesling at Metro Liquor from Zindhumbricht. If you can find it, because I always buy it all. It's Zind-Humbricht. It's from Alsace. It will blow your minds. It's incredible.
That was the TSN turning point back to Riesling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I bought a bottle randomly, and I was over at Leah's house, and we drank it, and I was like, oh, do you want to just do 12 months of Riesling for the tasting group?
Yeah.
Like, this is only a Riesling.
Yeah.
It was so breathtaking. It was incredible.
For sure.
So yeah, I think we'll probably touch on Riesling again this year, guys, 2021. So,
not every month.
Not every month, but I would say at least once, probably twice more.
Yeah.
We'll do Riesling until everyone's like, okay, it's amazing, because I didn't like the reaction.
I know.
You should do that. Like, just two? Okay, we'll do it again. We're gonna get this
until we convince you all.
Oh man. Okay, well, that'll be it for us for today. As always, feel free to hang out. We probably have some wine open from courtesy of Homestead that we'll pour out for you guys.
You always say we. That's a you choice. Bryce and I are never like, hey, let's pour some wine.
The team. We have wine on, so like there's some wines that we went on Saturday that I'm like, that won't be good on Tuesday, so we'll drink those. For our group members, you are going to be going home with both wines, of course. If you do want to buy any more of this, you will have to travel to Alberta, because that is where we got it from, and we didn't buy any extras, unfortunately. And we will see you next month.
Oh, but if you're part of both tastings, we are doing, for the virtual, we're doing it not on the 15th, but on the 22nd. Is that right? 22nd, we're doing a cooking class. And we're going to drink the Alta Lendon Tinto.
Oh, nice.
And we're going to pair that with a vegetarian Moroccan lentil carrot dish where you can pick up a meal kit at Lakeview Fine Foods. So that's going to be our virtual tasting. And if you're not a member of both clubs, you're more than welcome to sign up for the cooking class wine tasting thing. You can just email us and let us know.
Mm-hmm.
Then we set level 1.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
No, this is you. This is you.
Why?
Because you're going to talk more about that than I will.
Really?
You'll be the teacher. Come on, let's see.
So we also have an event coming up where we're offering WSET Level 1. So WSET is Wine and Spirits Education Trust. They're the most known in the industry for wine education, and it can be just for fun to enhance your knowledge. Level 1 is really basic about some of the most common varietals. And so it's a 6-7 week, 5 week?
4 week.
Anyways, you have a class a week, and then you write an exam. And depending on what the COVID restrictions look like, we're hoping to host an event and do tastings along the way. But obviously, we'll be limited just in terms of capacity and seating and that sort of thing. So if you're interested, let us know. The price that you'll see on the website does include the class. So you can actually go through the class and write the exam. The tasting week by week that we will put on and do it virtually with an instructor. And then the event at the end. So if we have to sort of tweak things as we go with the event and the in-person tasting, we'll adjust the price accordingly. But as it stands right now, we're hopeful that we can continue as is.
And this will be, so Bryce, Leah, myself, and Gina just did our WSET Level 2 course. And what we did was we added on, an add-on. One of Leah's good friends from Vancouver, his name is Keith Nicholson, who's like the coolest dude and one of the most intelligent guys when it comes to wine.
His only flaw is that he cheers for the New Orleans Saints, but I'll forgive him.
And also, like, I think that when he does come here eventually, he's going to say my place and not yours.
Yeah,
strongly.
whatever.
Yeah. But so with that, you can go online and do the WSET Level 1 course. It's 4 weeks, and it's all kind of an online book. But what we found with Keith is, we do 4 hour and a half sessions with him live virtually, and that will include the wine, again, hopefully that we all meet here. So you get to actually taste 3 wines with him live and go through what you were supposed to read that week. And it's just, for me, that was my favorite part.
Yeah, because then you're not having to go out and buy bottles to taste yourself, and B, you have an instructor rather than just doing online like chats or sessions or whatever, where you can actually ask questions live with him. And he has some pretty cool stories too that just sort of enhance the overall experience.
And then we'll do a party before the test, hopefully. A dinner and a party. We're going to do
with trivia.
Wine knowledge flip cup.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We're going to get into it, yeah. So if you guys are interested, just let us know. It'll be a lot of fun. But if not, we'll see you next month.
I think it's March 1st again.
March 1st again.
Yeah.
It's my birthday bash.
Ooh. It's not your birthday, March 1st.
The day before. We're doing champagne.
No, we're not.
No, we're not. No. I want to, okay. I just decided what we're going to do for next
What are you doing?
month.
Are you going to keep it a secret?
We'll have to check with you guys and make sure we can do it before I put it out there. Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, like I said, guys, hang out. We'll get you your wine, and if you have wine from last month as well, we'll get that for you. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.